When you think about Germanic invaders of Rome, your mind probably travels to Western Rome, be it Alaric Goths in Illyria and Italy, Gaiseric Vandals in Africa, Odoacer in Italy, or Clovis Franks in Gaul. However, over 200 years before the migration period, a huge coalition of barbarians devastated the Nubian provinces. Heck, they even made it to northeastern Italy, the heartland of the empire. It was to be the first major crisis of the empire. This is the story of the wars that were to take up all of Marcus Aurelius' reign, the Marcomannic Wars. Before that though, let's establish some context. It's 161. Antonine Plague, the successor of Hadrian, has just passed away. He was succeeded by Marcus Aurelius, who made his adoptive brother Lucius Verus his co-emperor. This was the first time that Rome was ruled by two legitimate emperors. The first time that Rome was legitimately ruled by two men since the Republic, in fact. However, war was brewing in the east. During the end of his until then very peaceful reign, Antoninus Pius had sent troops to reinforce the east. It seems that the Parthians might have wanted to take advantage of the succession crisis. If so, that hope did not manifest. It was a very stable and well-planned succession. In fact, Hadrian planned the succession for 2 generations, thus securing 2 stable successions, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, Rome was at war with Parthia now. I'll make it short today. Lucius Verus was sent east, taking 3 Pannonian legions with him, the Parthians took over Armenia and Osroene, Rome took them back, advanced into Mesopotamia, and destroyed the Parthian tomb capital of Seleucia Ctesiphon. Also the temple dedicated to Apollo was supposedly looted in Babylon. That would certainly have no consequence for the empire. Now this Parthian war was a Roman victory, but it basically resulted in a status quo antebellum. However, it is very important for one reason. It was Verus' fate to seem to bring a pestilence with him to whatever provinces he traversed on his return, and finally even to Rome. Reminiscent of Pandora's box, the Antonine Plague supposedly was the punishment for opening a golden casket in the aforementioned temple. At least the very hit, or rather mostly miss, Historia Augusta claims so. But yeah, the Antonine Plague. It was an absolutely massive deal. Marcus Aurelius even tried the mystic treatment option your court physician offers you. This plague truly greatly weakened the empire by killing millions of Romans. That's pretty fucking bad, of course. Dead people can't pay taxes, or rather, only once. Dead people can't serve in the army either. So many areas of Rome were greatly populated, surprisingly, also including livestock. It even seems that between 165 and 166, 2 legions were recruited from Italy. This was highly unusual. At this time, Rome didn't really recruit in Italy, or station military there for that matter. Rome truly was now in a state of weakness, including a financial crisis and perhaps a famine. The Danubian provinces were basically wiped for the taking. The first Marcomannic War was about to begin before the Parthian War even ended. Hostile Germanic armies will enter Italy for the first time since the Cimbrian War over 200 years prior during Republican times. But for that, let's quickly talk about our sources. We have 2 main written sources, the contemporary Cassius Dio and the non-contemporary Historia Augusta. These are both from a Roman perspective, of course, but that's a given. Now, Cassius Dio would be an amazing source. It would have been consulted on 2 separate occasions around 205 and 229, thus having access to senatorial documents. Specifically, Book 71 and 72 deal with the Marcomannic Wars. However, for Book 60 to 80, we only have epitomes of a Byzantine historian John Syphilis. Xiphilinus, who's missing parts of Marcus Aurelius' early life and sometimes corrects Cassius Dio. As for the Historia Augusta, it's not contemporary, being from 300 according to itself or 400 according to experts, and is not very reliable. The quality of the emperor biographies does vary, but in general, it is a lot of hearsay and even fiction. So we have to be very critical working with it. We also have from Marcus Aurelius himself the Meditations, 2 of 12 were written on campaign, but the Marcomannic Wars aren't mentioned a lot. As for non-written sources, there's archaeology of course, and the column of Marcus Aurelius. I myself did not look at those, but the literature I used has. Now let's get into the Marcomannic Wars. Due to the sources not providing dates, we don't have a set chronology. I will most rely on the late historian Peter Kehnes 2016 work zur althistorischen Erforschung der Markomannenkriege. Eine Annäherung mit aktualisierter Chronik der Jahre 166 bis 180 nach Christus. It seems like the best reconstruction to me. But do not memorize concrete dates. That's useless here. Okay, now let's begin with a simple question. Who were these Marcomanni giving the 3 wars their names? The Marcomanni were a Germanic people, but not the only one invading Rome. The Historia Augusta says this. Then, from the borders of Illyricum, even into Gaul, all the nations banded together against us. The Marcomanni, Varistae, Hermunduri and Quadi, the Suebians, Sarmatians, Lacringes and Buri, these and certain other together with the Victuali, namely Ossi, Bessi, Cobotes, Roxolani, Bastarnae, Alani, Peucini, and finally the Costoboci. I doubt that were all the natives from Gaul to Illyricum, but as you can see, it was not just the Marcomanni. Heck, even the Germanic Sarmatians under the name, yes, Sidleys, participated. The Asian tribes too were involved, not just Germanics. So now, Emperor Marcus Aurelius certainly needed more money for the war effort against all these peoples, but he did something very unusual. Instead of taxing the shit out of the already suffering population of Rome, as was custom, he held an auction of imperial furnishings. Here on screen the text of the story Augusta, take this event with a grain of salt though. Now let's look at the war effort, shall we? In 166, remember the dates aren't secure though, 6,000 Lombards and Ubii invaded Pannonia Superior. Barbarians have crossed into Roman territory. But keep in mind that when I talk about 6,000 Lombards and Ubii, that doesn't mean that all Ubii and Lombards were suddenly at war with Rome. Many Ubii remained faithful Roman allies. Also the local governor of Pannonia Superior, Marcus Aurelius, concluded a peace with the intermediation of Marcomannic King Marius. But bad news for the Romans, the ongoing plague stopped a counter-offensive plan for the next year of 167. The Marcomanni now invaded Noricum and Pannonia. Dacia too was not safe. So, the next year, on January 6, both emperors, Marcus Aurelius and his adoptive brother and son-in-law, Lucius Verus, incest, that's a CK3 reference, marched off together with a base of operations being Aquileia. The invaders somewhat retreated and apparently even killed some of the warmongers within their ranks. Some tribes even asked for peace, but the emperors instead advanced into Pannonia Superior. Perhaps now also the, I'm just gonna use the Latin pronunciation, Praetentura Italiae et Alpium, a special military district to protect northeastern Italy, was created. Although it could have happened as late as 171. Unfortunately for the Romans, the plague decimated their legions, including Praetorian Prefect Titus Furius Victorinus. Guess in the end Victorinus wasn't victorious, but perhaps furious in his final moments. So Lucius Verus demanded a retreat in winter. However, either in January or February 169, Lucius Verus passed away. Now the historian Augustus says, such was Marcus' sense of honor. Moreover, that although Verus' vices mightily offended him, he concealed and defended them. He also deified him after his death, honored Verus himself with many sacrifices, consecrated a flamen for him and a college of Antonine Prize, and gave him all honors that are appointed for the deified. After Verus' death, Cassius revolted from Marcus. After the death of Verus, Marcus Antoninus held the empire alone, a nobler man by far and more abounding in virtues. So yeah, Marcus was busy mourning for a couple of months, but it's false that Avidius Cassius revolted now. We'll talk about his revolt later. In the meantime, Marcus Aurelius' daughter, so Lucius Verus' widow, Lucilla, was being married off to the distinguished general Tiberius Claudius Pompeianus. This shows that this war was pretty important, otherwise you wouldn't marry off an imperial princess. Okay, at least Marcus Aurelius wouldn't do so, I think. But the Danubian province was still under attack by barbarian invaders, with battles taking place in Noricum, Pannonia and Dacia. This situation was so serious that by now, Marcus Claudius Fronto, a hero of the Parthian War, was granted super command over Tris Daciae in Moesia Superior. However, the next year, Rome was dealt a crushing defeat by the Marcomanni, losing 20,000 men, including the new Praetorian Prefect Marcus Vindex. Let me remind you, the empire suffered from a manpower crisis. 20,000 men was quite a lot. Even Italy was invaded now by Marcomannic and Quadi through the Julian Alps. Heck, Marcus Aurelius' HQ was probably located in Aquileia, which was now besieged. Another town, Aperturgium, was actually destroyed. While in the chronology I use, the year's 170, it could have been pretty much any time between 166 and 172, although 170 is the most popular date. Meanwhile in Dacia, the skilled general and super commander, Marcus Claudius Fronto, died in battle against the Germanics and Sarmatians. The Costoboci and other three Dacian tribes now ravaged the eastern Balkans. Pompeianus and Pertinax, who was to be emperor for 2 months 23 years from now, led successful campaigns in Noricum and Pannonia. And the war finally turned around. Marcomannic army was absolutely devoured on the frozen Danube during the winter of 170 to 171. During the same winter, Marcus Aurelius moved headquarters to Carnuntum. Peter Canis speaks of a cleansing of the provinces of Oetia, Noricum, and both Pannonias through Pompeianus and Pertinax. I'm unsure whether he means that the invaders were driven away or ethnically cleansed. The latter certainly wouldn't be unusual for ancient warfare, and invading barbarians often took their women and children with them. We later see that our Stoic emperor might honor his adoptive grandfather Hadrian's legacy by ethnically cleansing the Sarmatians, because since Hadrian's ethnic cleansing of the Jews in Judea, Rome hadn't seen enough ethnic cleansing. But that's for later. Just now things seem to be going well, but let's update the map and... Oh no, that's really bad, I mean for real? Yep, indeed, in 171 the Costoboci made it all the way to Attica somehow. They could only be beaten off by Cornelius Clement's diplomacy of using the Vandal Hastingi and the Lacringi tribes in Dacia after the mystical city of Eleusis was already plundered. Surely that's the worst thing a barbarian tribe from the Balkans will do to Eleusis within the next quarter millennium. Spain too was plagued by an Amazigh invasion at the same time, so L. Julius Verhilius Gratus Julianus was sent there to deal with that while also having been busy with the Costoboci crisis. Oh well, but now that that's over with, Marcus Aurelius received Quadi envoys and concluded a peace that was also sure to last. One of the terms was not to let other hostile tribes pass through their territory or take refugees from them, a condition sure to be kept. On top of that, they were still barred from Roman markets in case other tribes pretended to be Quadi to trade with Rome. Also importantly for our later discussion of Marcus Aurelius' motives, he settled some smaller tribes in Dacia, Moesia, Pannonia, Germania, and even Italy itself, while others were integrated into the military. But the other barbarian coalition had been successfully divided now, for Marcus Aurelius also concluded peace with some other tribes as well and gained some horses and cattle in the process. In even more positive news for Rome, in 172, perhaps in autumn, the Marcomanni, specifically them, not all of the other tribes of the coalition, were successfully defeated. The defeated Marcomanni fled to the Quadi. There would soon be a war with the Quadi, but the Marcomannic formally concluded a deditio. That is, a surrender and subsequent subjugation by Rome. Or maybe the peace was that the Marcomanni had to retreat 10, wait, never mind, 5 Roman miles behind the Danube, exchange prisoners with Rome, be able to visit Roman markets again, and have a Roman-friendly king installed. The literature I use doesn't quite seem to agree. As for primary source, the translation of Cassius Dio I use says he subdued the Marcomanni, but that's a bit ambiguous, and sadly I don't know any Koine Greek. Here's the original passage though, if anyone can make it out. That aside, apparently a prefect called Valerius Maximianus, not Minus, managed to kill the Neristic king Valao in combat. Killing a foreign king sure would be great dead lore. But the other war with the Marcomanni was finally over. Marcus Aurelius, and also Commodus, received the triumphal titles of Germanicus. And 1 3 seconds later, a new war broke out of a treaty-breaking Quadi, and the two couldn't go back to Rome after all. Dang. You see, there was a little coup d'etat among the Quadi. They replaced the old Roman-approved King Tertius with the more hostile Ariogassus. King Ariogassus, despite his name, then banned homosexuality. He said, "This is not a Germanic value, but a Roman degeneracy." The denarius is finished. He did actually offer to release 50,000 Roman prisoners of war, but Marcus rejected, for he did not want to acknowledge the new king. Instead, he put a bounty on the king of 1,000 gold pieces alive or 500 dead. My head, it's yours if you want it. Find it. I left all the quad I have to offer there. And so, the legionaries set sights across the Danube in pursuit of their dreams. The Danube has truly entered a great bounty hunting era. Thus the Romans made it into the heart of the Quadi, but they were encircled. They were truly in a pinch. The emperor himself was in danger as well. The troops were thirsty, hot, and exhausted. But then, in the hardest times, a miracle was bestowed upon the Romans. Indeed, there's a story to the effect that Anufis, an Egyptian magician, who was a companion of Marcus, had invoked by means of enchantments various deities and in particular Mercury, the god of the air, by this means attracted the rain. So Cassius Dio. It is said that the exhausted Romans drank the rainwater the storm brought with it to soothe their thirst. Distracted, this logically would have prompted the Quadi to attack, however it is said that the thunderbolt struck them and only them. Well, that's one story, the so-called rain miracle, but the Romans did indeed avert disaster and actually come out on top during this battle. There's apparently a debate amongst historians over whether the miracle can be attributed to the personal prayer of Marcus Aurelius, to perhaps Mercury, the Egyptian magician's sorcery, or Christian soldiers of the Legio 12 Fulminata praying to their one and only god. I don't quite know what the debate is about. I assume it's over which one of these myths was the original myth, although it would be funny if historians debate over theology, which this extract from Kovacs makes it seem like. But Cassius Dio mentions it. It's depicted on the column of Marcus Aurelius, so we can pretty safely assume that it did indeed happen and sure must have felt like a miracle. That aside, it is also during this phase of the war where Marcus Aurelius started working on his famous meditations. The wars are sparsely mentioned though. Also after the crucial victory, Marcus Aurelius' HQ was moved from Carnuntum to Sirmium in the winter of 173 to 174, in preparation for a greater focus on the war of the Iazyges, whom I'll call Sarmatians from now on because that's easier to say. During the same winter, a victory could actually be achieved against the Sarmatians of the frozen Danube. The Danube seems to have frozen a lot, though I guess Roman historians like to pretend as if it froze every winter, which it did not, but I guess during the Marcomannic Wars it did indeed freeze a lot. I mean, that's cool, I guess. It makes for a neat story. Anyway, genocide? Yeah. Okay, maybe not quite genocide, but the Sarmatians were defeated so badly that in 174, a faction of Sarmatians sent diplomats to ask for peace, but Marcus Aurelius rejected because he wanted to exterminate them. Not just Canis says this, The primary sources mention his genocidal intention to Herr Cassius Dio, and was sent to Marcus by Viasugas to request peace, but they did not obtain anything. For Marcus, both because he knew their ways to be untrustworthy, and also because he had been deceived by the Quadi, wished to annihilate them utterly. Damn, did Marcus Aurelius just invent the concept of ways because he hates Sarmatians that much? Okay, that's definitely the fault of the old translation I used. But his adoptive grandfather Hadrian would be proud indeed. This is a part of the video where I have to say, such measures aren't just a modern phenomenon. Such horrible war crimes, if not borderline genocide, were seen as completely normal. So maybe Marcus Aurelius at this point was just fed up with war, maybe he didn't give such drastic orders, perhaps Cassius Dio exaggerated, I'm not quite sure. Either way, Am Roma Chai, Slava Remu. Oh, by the way, this was the message to the Germans from the thumbnail, even though the Sarmatians aren't Germanic. But it felt more fitting than my message to the Iranians considering all the other tribes were Germanic. Do forgive me, my click-through rate has just been abysmal since April, so I hoped Islam is you representing Marcus Aurelius' help. Back to the first Marcomannic War. It's actually almost over. But before the peoples of the Danube, Roman and Barbarian alike, could enjoy the peace, the Quadi broke the treaty once more due to aid from the Sarmatians. The same Sarmatians who just overthrew their king, Benedepsos, for trying to make overtures to Rome and replace him with the pro-peace king Xanthicus? Okay, I'm generally unsure where the coup fits into the chronology, because the Romans still invaded and devastated Sarmatia in 175. I imagine it was during those losses that Xanthicus realized, okay, maybe peace would be a good idea. Or maybe the Romans invaded no matter who the king was because of genocide. Who knows. Commodus also made his imperial way, Profectio, to Germania on May 19th. But that's not important because now it happened. What do I mean by it? Well, let me just read out the Historia Augusta. Marcus Aurelius wished to make a province of Marcomannia and Lagos of Sarmatia, and he would have done so, had not Avidius Cassius just then raised a rebellion in the east. This man proclaimed himself emperor, some say at the wish of Faustina, Marcus Aurelius' wife, who was now in despair over her husband's, rumored, death. Others, however, say that Cassius proclaimed himself emperor after spreading false rumors of Marcus' death. And indeed, he had called him the deified. Marcus was not much disturbed by the revolt, nor did he adopt harsh measures against Cassius' dear ones. The Senate, however, declared Cassius a public enemy and confiscated his property to the public treasury. The emperor, then abandoning the Sarmatian and Marcomannic Wars, set out against him. But as Cassius still reports, while Marcus was making preparations for the Civil War, the death of Cassius was reported to him at the same time, the news of many victories over various barbarians. Basically, the usurper was killed before Marcus even made it to the east. Thus was this pretender slain after a dream of empire lasting 3 months and 6 days. So Marcus made peace terms with the remaining barbarians to deal with the Civil War that never happened. The peace terms with the Sarmatians were similar to the previous ones of the Marcomanni and Quadi. A buffer zone of 10 Roman miles behind the Danube, 100,000 prisoners were returned to Rome, and 8,000 horsemen were given to Rome, 5,500 of which were sent to Britannia. I let you decide whether there was an actual threat in Britannia, or whether Marcus Aurelius just wanted to keep them at a distance. Both are plausible and not mutually exclusive. What's interesting is that Marcus Aurelius rejected aid from barbarians within the empire for the Civil War. Maybe it was a matter of honor, or maybe he simply didn't trust them. And when he stayed in the east for a bit and punching the provinces that just rebelled. Although according to the unreliable Historia Augusta, he did take away their games and public assemblies for a bit, which, if true, would have basically abolished entertainment for a while. Comparatively, that's still clemency, but it would be like taking away a Hoi player's PC, basically torture. Anyway, peace in our time, officially marked by the triumph of Marcus Sarmaticus and Commodus Sarmaticus on December 23rd, 176, the triumph of the Germanis at Sarmatis. The first Marcomannic War had ended. Rome was finally at peace after the devastating years of warfare on the Danube. It was plague-ridden hell on earth, but it was finally over. 176 had truly been a glorious year. The Germanics and Sarmatians had been subdued. 177 too will surely be a great year of recovery as well. And it was all for nothing. War broke out yet again. Now guess who rebelled? Who else but the Quadi? Also, I'm starting to understand the war crimes if I'm being honest. Good, now write a comment with a timestamp and a skull emoji or some shit like that. Good viewer, well done. Enough yapping. Not that much happened in 177. The Quintilli cousins, mostly Maximus, members of the ancient Quinctiliad gens, managed to score some victory. Despite that, Marcus Aurelius no longer used the titles of Germanicus and Sarmaticus. I suppose then didn't feel like he deserved them anymore, because his prior wars seemed to have been for naught. At least that's my pet theory. Also, we got a new Praetorian prefect, Publius Terentianus Paternus, That might have actually been in 179 though. Then in 178, war was officially declared for the ritual throwing of a spear into a piece of land known as Aga Hostilis, representing enemy territory. This was done by the official priest. The 3rd of August then, Marcus Aurelius and Commodus made the imperial way to Prefectio Augustorum for the Expeditio Germanica Secunda. Their main enemies were the Marcomanni, Hermunduri, Sarmatians and Quadi. However, we do not have the details on the cause of the war. However, we do know that in 179 Paternus won victories over unnamed enemies, which resulted in Marcus Aurelius' last imperial acclamation. Imperial acclamation number 10, number 3 for Commodus. Heck, the Buri and even Sarmatians were made foederati now. More on that in the next episode. Meanwhile, the Quadi wanted to retreat north to the related Semnones, but Marcus did not allow this. Pleas for peace by the Marcomanni and Quadi were also ignored. 20,000 Roman troops occupied the lands permanently from this point onwards. By next year, the war had turned into a war of decimation. So for that, Marcus was preparing for another campaign during the spring of 180, but he fell sick before the Partler and died on the 17th of March 180. Marcus Aurelius has passed away. Commodus was the new emperor. What a great reign it will be. While the ancient sources accused Commodus of rejecting the advice of his expert advisors Marcus had left him, and stabbing the Roman Reich in the back by instantly making peace with the barbarians, even though Commodus might easily have destroyed them, he in fact actually continued the war for another couple of months, and only then made peace with the Marcomanni and Quadi. His triumph was held on October the 22nd, 180, marking the official end of the war, 7 months after Marcus' death. Now, I might not have been able to teleport, but you do not need 7 months to make peace and then travel from Pannonia to Rome. So what did this peace look like? There will be a much more detailed version in the next episode, but here's the short one. Basically the same terms as before. As an example, the terms for the Marcomanni and Quadi. Cassius' deal will be shown on screen. No annexations, the return of prisoners of war, grain deliveries, the handover of weapons, the one-time provision of auxiliary troops, no wars with the Roman allies of the Sarmatians, Buri and Vandals, and finally, things could only be held once a month under the supervision of a Roman centurion. But in exchange, Rome would have no permanent occupations across the neutral border zone, and trade was finally restored. Well, that was the short version. This peace actually lasted until the middle of the 3rd century, when it fell apart for obvious reasons. Until next time in 10 years, when we talk about both the invaders and Marcus Aurelius' possible motives and goals, and me reluctantly sucking off Commodus. Very reluctantly, might I add. While you wait, how about checking out my other videos on Rome, links here on the right? Or if you're tired of Rome, how about leaving YouTube and checking out my favorite anime, Nichijou? You won't regret it.